أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إذ تسعدون ولا تلوون على أحد والرسول يدعوكم في أخراكم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We discussed the Battle of Badr in yesterday's talk, and we discussed how this battle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set up, even though the numbers did not add up, even though the numbers of the Muslims were roughly a third of what you found on the other side, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one who granted them victory. And he did so by doing a number of things. Amongst those things that he did was the rain that he sent down the night before. Amongst those things that he did was that he placed them in a position to give them the advantage. Amongst those things that he did was that he granted them a little bit of sleep the night before so that they could be well rested for this battle. And probably the most important in some ways, the thing that he did was that he granted them 3,000 angels who would fight by their sides. And interestingly enough, the Quran said that none of these angels really fought with them anyways. They did not need these angels. The only reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted them these angels was so that they would have the morale. And this shows the faith and the strength that they themselves carried and that they themselves did not fully know about. And we read that in this battle, which was a very short battle compared to some of the other battles of the Prophet, all of the greats and the heads of Quraysh were killed amongst them. And most importantly than all was the Fir'aun of this ummah, and that was none but Abu Jahl. And after the war came to an end, and after Ali ibn Abi Talib played the role that he played, then there were disputes with regards to the ghanaim. There were disputes with regards to the captives of war, and we read and heard that the Prophet freed many of those who came to war against him. The Battle of Badr has now come to an end. The Muslims seems like life is going to be good moving forward. They are now going to return back to Medina. But of course, when one problem goes away, another problem comes. You know, when one test is, you go through one test, another test starts to present itself. And that next test is the Battle of Uhud that we will be discussing tonight, inshallah. And we will do so by posing the following questions. Number one, which person was there who automatically now became the de facto leader amongst Quraysh after the Battle of Badr and after all of the leaders of Quraysh were killed in the Battle of Badr? Number two, how did the heads of Quraysh in Mecca prepare themselves and their people for the Battle of Uhud? Number three, who was the first to come to the battlefield and take out the flag bearer in the Battle of Uhud on the side of the mushrikeen? Number four, which mountain was there that the Prophet was extremely worried about and that Khalid ibn Walid used to then attack and ambush the Muslims from behind? And number five, and finally, what event took place in Uhud that would never repeat itself in Islamic history? And what is the theological importance of this event that took place. Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 5 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allow us to begin from here. Badr went very well. It went so well that the Muslims themselves didn't believe it was going to go this well. And the narration says the Prophet sent someone from the area of Badr to come back to Medina and give the news. And when they brought the news, there were people in Medina who could not believe it. There were people in Medina who said, no, you're wrong. You've lost it. And they told the messenger who had come, say, you've lost it, you're wrong. You guys were defeated. And he said, no, I saw it with my own eyes. All the heads of Quraysh have been defeated now. And the reaction in Mecca was very similar. That the messenger who came to bring the news, people told him, they said, you've lost it. The event that happened is so scary for you. The trauma was so heavy. Now you're saying nonsense. You're saying all these big guys were killed. And so interestingly, they told him, they said, okay, where's Fulan? And he said, he got killed in Badr. They said, where's Fulan? He said, he got killed in Badr. So to test him, they said, okay, where is Fulan? And that person was sitting not far away from him. But they wanted to see, would he just say everyone got killed? Or would he point to this person and say, no, this person is here. His name was Sufyan ibn Umayyah, the son of Umayyah ibn Khalaf, the owner of Bilal that we talked about, yes? So they said, okay, well, tell us what happened to Safwan. And he said, no, I haven't lost it. Safwan is sitting right there. But then he added the following lines. And he said, I saw how his father and his brother got massacred and killed. It's like, I saw this happen with my own eyes. And now that the heads of Quraysh, so many of them have been killed, and the Ummah has been rid of them finally, now a new person and a new character enters into a role of leadership, and that is Abu Sufyan. So far up until now, Abu Sufyan was in charge of the caravan. He used to take the caravan, so on and so forth. Now, he's going to become the head of Quraysh. So now as Quraysh comes back to Mecca, they are just reeling from the Battle of Badr. Abu Sufyan, and this is the first big mistake that he makes and a lesson that we can learn from all of this. Abu Sufyan comes back to Mecca, and as people now prepare to cry and mourn their loved ones, as they come together to bury their loved ones and to, cry over their loved ones, Abu Sufyan stops them right there and then. He says, there's going to be no crying today, no mourning. Those emotions, he wanted for all of it to be bottled up inside of them. Why? Because we're going to go to war again. We were defeated in Badr, but guess what we're going to do? We're not going to give Muhammad and his people the pleasure of seeing us crying. So no crying in the city of Mecca, and we're going to go back to war. Not only did he defeat us, he has now also built covenants and relationships with the other tribes around Medina. So now when our caravans want to go to Syria, and they want to bring back all the wealth and the money, we cannot go at all. He's completely crossed this path, because this was the wisdom of the Prophet. That as he went around, he used to build covenants and relationships with the other tribes. And slowly these tribes became part of this bigger covenant with the Prophet. And hence, if Quraysh wanted to pass by one of them, they were also responsible to stop Quraysh and their caravan from going. So Abu Sufyan said, listen, we can't just sit here anymore. He has closed this pathway to our wealth. If we want to be able to defeat him, now's the time. We have to go to war with him again. And the people of Mecca were so severely wounded by the Battle of Badr, they all agreed to this. So the caravan that had came back, the initial caravan that the Prophet was trying to intercept, when the caravan came into Mecca, Abu Sufyan said, listen, instead of giving back the wealth of all of this caravan to those who had invested in the caravan, what we're going to do is we're going to sell all of its wealth. We're going to pour all of that money, we're going to invest all of that money into the next battle. Why give it back to everybody? No, we're going to take all of that. This grudge that you have, this hatred that you have of Muhammad now, let's invest in it. And he said this caravan, instead of giving it back to the people who have ownership in it, we're going to take it, sell it. We're going to invest all of that money into this new battle that is going to come to be known as the Battle of Urud. So Uhud is now coming immediately out of on the heels of Badr. And now I want to pause here, because this was the first big mistake that Abu Sufyan made. And he would continue to make this mistake for almost the rest of his life. And that is this. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defeats you, when He puts you through difficulty, when things aren't going well, something you did and the outcome was not that, and you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not necessarily on your side, instead of just continuing on this path, you have to step back and say, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell me something. Maybe I've been disobedient. Maybe I have to change my path. And the Quran talks about this because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also sent these defeats to the people of Fir'aun as well. Fir'aun used to disobey Musa alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used to send these punishments towards him. And instead of Fir'aun sitting there and saying, you know what, this is my Lord telling me that I have to humble myself, instead what he would say, he would get even more arrogant, get even more stubborn. Say, now you did this, now I'm going to do even more. And you and I do that in our personal lives as well. Sometimes things don't go well. You have to sit back and see, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending me a message? Quran says the people of Fir'aun, we put them through difficulties. Yes, there was droughts, there was frogs, and if it wasn't word by word what the Quran was saying, we would have dismissed these as myths, by the way. Yes, but the Quran says this. وَالضَّفَادِعَ, there were frogs that came. Yes, وَالدَّمْ, and the Nile River turned into blood, and other signs that took place. And the Quran says we sent all of these as signs to Fir'aun, not as punishments. We're trying to wake him up, trying to send him a message. You have to humble yourself. You disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We show you who's in power, who's in control, and then you continue to do the same thing. And the Quran says, فَلَوْلَا إِذْ جَاءَهُمْ بَأْسُنَا تَضَرَّعُوا. How come when these people, we put them through difficulty, how come it doesn't humble them? And then the Quran says, instead of humbling them, it would make them more arrogant. They would build even more hatred. They would build even more of a grudge in their hearts. Say, okay, now that this happened, I'm going to do even more the next time. And this is exactly the mistake that Abu Sufyan was making. And this is the mistake that you and I make sometimes. No, if something doesn't go well, I have to pause and see, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to send me a message? And I want to move on from this point because there's so many details we want to get to. If you want to see if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending you a message, there's a very simple way of figuring this out. I always say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't weak. He doesn't need someone to speak on his behalf. If he wants to send a message, he can do it very clearly. If I want to see if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending me a message, when something doesn't go well, only question I have to ask myself is this: am I disobeying him? Am I disobeying him? If the answer is yes, this is his message to you to change your path. And sometimes the answer will be no. Maybe you weren't disobeying him. Maybe no, you were doing everything based on what you really thought you were supposed to do and you're not disobeying him. No problem, then this is not necessarily a message from him that you have to change paths. Maybe it has some other philosophy. The difficulties that come to us in our lives can have a multitude of different reasons. It's not always you are a terrible person, this is why this terrible thing happens. It's not always that. And unfortunately, you will find people who will speak on behalf of Islam and push this idea that everything that is bad that happened is because you did something and you were terrible. No, who said so? Our religion is not so simplistic. Sometimes it could be, sometimes not. And that is this moment of reflection that you and I need to have. And we have to sit back and say, Ya Allah, am I disobeying you? If I am, then this is a clear message from you that I have to change my path. Because with Fir'aun and Abu Sufyan, this is exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was doing. Saying, listen, you're on the wrong path, you need to change. And this guy, instead of getting the message, say, you know what, I'm going to double down now. We're going to go even back and we're going to do even more. And this is exactly what they did in Uhud. Because when they came for Uhud, now they came with 3 times the numbers that they came the first time. You thought 1,000 versus 300 was difficult. Now they came back with 3,000. And they got some other tribes to join them as well. And they took with them their own women. And the thought process was, in the beginning of the war, the women are going to be there to push us forward and to give us moral support. And if it ever comes down to it really being a difficult situation, the women being there is going to make us even more desperate to continue to fight. Because if you take your family, there's no more, just running away. You can't just run away with your family. Yes, when you go with your family, that means I've come, I know I'm going to be victorious. So they took their women with them, and amongst them, the daughter of Utbah. And that was Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan and his family has already taken a blow in the Battle of Badr. And Ali ibn Abi Talib, years later, will write in his letters to Muawiyah, and he will say, I still have that sword with which I took the life of your father, I took the life of your grandfather, your uncle, and your brother. This is Ali ibn Abi Talib, years later. It's in Nahj al-Balagha. So he's already taken a blow. He starts to put together this army. And now Uhud is very different because Badr, the Prophet was anticipating this. He was looking forward to it. He was prepared for it. Uhud, he's not necessarily prepared for it. No one knows that this is happening. Until the Prophet hears the news that his uncle Abbas in Mecca, who at this point, there's dispute, had he embraced the faith yet or not, there's dispute about this. He wrote a letter to the Prophet and he gave it to a rider who would ride quickly between Mecca and Medina, and he would bring this message. The message came to the Prophet, and the Prophet took the letter. Side note here, when the Prophet takes a letter, when you and I take a letter, what do? We take the letter, we open it, we start reading it, huh? But the Prophet had a custom. And that custom was that he would never read these letters. And he would never write the letters either. You and I, when they give us a letter, what do? We open the letter, we read it, right? The Prophet, the letter was given to him, he gave it to his companion. And you and I might think this is just coincidence, like he wants someone else to do the work for him. No, this is because his whole miracle is that I am unschooled. I don't read and write. This is not what I do. Because this is going to be the miracle of the Prophet that is going to remain thousands of years to come. And that no one, in the Quran talks about this, that no one will ever dare say that Muhammad was schooled. That this Quran that he came up with, yes, someone taught him this stuff. He went to some university. He knew how to read, write, so on and so forth. He was never schooled. Miraculously, maybe he knew how to read and write. But schooling, no. And that's why when the Prophet, letters were given to him, he would never read these letters himself. He would give it to his companion to read it to him. And when he wanted to write the letter, he would never write the letter himself. He would give it to his companions to write the letter. And that is why when you look at the letters of the Prophet, usually at the end it will say that this letter was written by so-and-so. Then the stamp of the Prophet. This is, see the Prophet where his vision is? And the Quran says, if you had been reading or writing, people later on would have come and said, they would have doubted. Oh yeah, he can read it. He's schooled as well, just like everybody else. The Prophet is thinking about his miracle for 1400 years and counting, yes? So they brought the letter to the Prophet, gave it to his companion, said, read the letter to me. But he told him to read the letter to him secretly, not in front of others. The letter said, an army is coming towards you bigger than the army of Badr. And the Prophet told the person who read the letter to him, he said, you will not speak of this to anybody. The wisdom. How he controls the morale of these Muslims. Unbelievable. He said, you will not speak of this to anybody. He said, it's between you and me. Then he himself took a companion of his, Hubab ibn Mundhir. He said, Hubab, you're going to go be my scouts. Go and scout out and figure out what their numbers are actually like. Like verify the information that has been brought to me. Go and verify. Hubab went, came back, and the Prophet had told him, he said, if their numbers are high, do not tell me in front of others. Because information is this important. You open your mouth sometimes, I open my mouth sometimes. When it's not the right time, you create problems. How many times do we see this on a personal level? We say something when we're not supposed to say it, then sometimes for months or years, you have to go back, try to fix it now. He said, not in front of everybody, because then they will start to panic. Hubab went, came back, told the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, the numbers are exactly what they told us the numbers are going to be. This is an army that is now bigger than the army of Badr. The Prophet brought his companions together, and he was going to do a consultation with them. And his opinion was that we would stay in Medina, and this was give us an advantage. Because when you're in your own boundaries, it's a lot easier for you to do things. And this is where the consultation went back and forth, just like it went back and forth with the Battle of Badr. And some came and said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, we should stay in Medina. Some said, no, we should go outside of Medina. And you know who doesn't have an opinion again? Ali ibn Abi Talib doesn't have an opinion. But you're so strategic. You're the one who went to the battlefield before anyone in Badr. You're the one who changed the whole tune of the whole war in Badr. What's your opinion? I don't have an opinion. The Prophet already gave his opinion. This is a lesson for you and I. When Islam gives its opinion, that's the opinion. And then you and I sit there and say, you know, this God who created me and billions of other human beings and he's running the whole world, I know he said this, but let me see what my opinion is. Let me think and verify. Is he really, did he get it right here? This is what you and I do. We think we're smart. We think we're... He said, the Prophet has an opinion. I don't have an opinion. And there was back and forth. And finally, the Prophet saw that most of his community wants to do what? Most of the community is saying, no, we have to leave. And the Prophet, though it wasn't his personal opinion, he agreed to it. He said, fine. He went to wear his armor. While he went to wear his armor, some of the companions came back. They said, Ya Rasulullah, we regret pushing so hard. We take back our word. Let us just stay in Medina like you had suggested. And the Prophet said, when a prophet puts on his armor, he doesn't take it off anymore. You can't have this undecisiveness. Yes? We made this decision, we're going to move forward with this decision. And this is the wisdom of the Prophet himself, yes? That for some reason, if he puts on this armor now, if he's now in a position to take it off, then maybe it creates even more doubt every step of the way that you go. Well, maybe we should have done this. Maybe we should have done that. He said, no, we agreed to this decision, though it wasn't even his own decision. But he said, when a prophet puts on his armor, that is it. You have to move on with that decision. So now they started to move outside of the city of Medina. If we can recite a salawat, and on both sides, please move forward. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraj. Ma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. One more salawat, please. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. The Prophet now starts to head out of the city of Medina, and he moves towards the mountain of Uhud. For perspective, this mountain of Uhud is not far away from Medina. It's a couple minutes away. If you visit Medina, sometimes you have the opportunity to go visit Uhud as well. It's very close. So they start to head out. He gives his flag to Ali ibn Abi Talib. And now they start to head out towards this area of Uhud. The distance between Medina and Uhud, very small distance. By car, it might be 5 minutes, something like that. But on this distance, as they are heading out, then a group of people who would then be known to be the munafiqeen of the ummah of the Prophet. And at the head of them, Abdullah ibn Ubay. It's a name we've talked about before as well. Side note, Abdullah ibn Ubay was supposed to become kind of the king of Medina before the Prophet showed up. When the Prophet showed up, of course, he lost that authority in that position. And because of that, he always had issues with the Prophet. And until the final moments of his life, because he didn't get his hands on that authority, he did not believe in the Prophet. And what he's about to do is one of the biggest problems he's going to create for the Prophet. This army is now heading out. The army of the Prophet, he's been able to put together 1,000. On the other side, 3,000 are coming. All of a sudden, in a couple seconds, a third of this army is going to go back to Medina. Why? Because Abdullah ibn Ubay, he came up with his own excuse. He said, Ya Rasulullah, what are we doing? We're going to fight outside of Medina. We're all going to get massacred here. I don't want to come anymore. I'm going to go back with my people. And out of this 900 something, 300 something went back with him. And they said, come back, the Prophet is here. And he said, this is the decision that we have to move on with. And he used to say, لَوْ نَعْلَمُ قِتَالًا لَاتَّبَعْنَاكُمْ. If we thought this is actually going to be a battle, I would have come with you. In other words, you're all going to get massacred here. This was his excuse. That like, I don't think this is the best. In reality, he just didn't want to deal with the situation. This was his excuse. And this is the differentiator between the one who believes in the Prophet and the one who doesn't believe in the Prophet. It's not the one who just says Muhammad is my messenger. It's the one who actually does what the Prophet asks him to do. This is the differentiator. You and I, we say yes. They ask us, you're Muslim. Yeah, I'm Muslim. But Muslim means the one who submits. We read in the dua yesterday, قَلْبِي لِقَلْبِكُمْ سِلْمٌ. My heart is with you. وَأَمْرِي لِأَمْرِكُمْ مُتَّبِعٌ. But my affairs also follow your affairs. The way I do things is actually the way you tell me to do things. Not just I sit there and say, yeah, we're part of this camp. Abdullah ibn Ubay, he used to pray in front of people too. He used to tell, I'm with the Prophet too. This is what he used to say. But when it really came down to it, he said, no, I don't care what Muhammad has to say. And this is a lesson for you and I. To the extent you obey the Prophet, this is the extent of your relationship with the Prophet. It's not based on titles, it's not based on names, it's not based on attributing yourself or myself to the Prophet. It's based on how much you actually obey the Prophet. A third of this army is now heading back. There were other tribes who were going to go back. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved them, helped them to stay. 700 something now come to the mountain of Uhud. And now the Prophet is positioning this. And of course, I wish we could have like the map up so you could see, but I'll try my best to explain it. And the Prophet, he positioned things in such a way that the mountain of Uhud, which is a really big mountain, was behind him. So imagine this wall that is behind me is the mountain of Uhud. There was another mountain to the left of the Muslims. This is where the Muslims were. Behind them, the mountain of Uhud. To the left, imagine this wall, was another mountain known as the mountain of Aynain. Name's not too important. This was another mountain. And the Prophet from the very beginning was worried about this mountain because he felt like there could have been an attack by going around it. And so initially he set up 50 archers on this mountain as well. This is the army of the Prophet, Uhud, the other mountain, and on this side is the disbelievers. I'm sorry to put you guys where the disbelievers are, but this is just how the positioning of the thing happened, right? So he set up archers on this side. And he told them, this lesson we're going to learn is the biggest lesson we're going to learn all of tonight. And we're going to leave it at the end of tonight. He told them, he said, listen, under no circumstance do you leave this place. And in some narrations, he said, if they push us all the way back into Medina, meaning like it's a full defeat, you will not leave the mountain. And if we push them all the way back to Mecca, it's impossible. But he's saying, if it's such a great victory as if we push them all the way back to Mecca, you will not leave the mountain. 50-something archers. So you have to stay here. The command doesn't get any more direct than this. Imagine the Prophet looks you in your eyes and says, listen, you have to stay here no matter what. The armies now are going to engage now. Quraysh, in order to break apart this 700 something that's left, they came to the army of the Prophet. They said, "O Ansar were the people of Medina. They said, "O Ansar, we have nothing to do with you. If you want to leave right now, you can leave. We only want to deal with Muhammad and the Muhajirin who came from Mecca." This was their attempt to break them apart from one another. So we don't have a problem with you. So Muhammad ruined everything. We just want to deal with Muhammad. And of course, the number of Muhajirin is much less than the number of Ansar. It's maybe a third, maybe a fourth of them. This was their attempt. The Ansar said, no, we're going to remain here. We're going to support the Prophet. This is why we are all in debt to the Ansar. Forever, we will always be in debt to these individuals. They said, we will stay. They said, fine, we're going to now engage in war. Some arrows started to get shot between the two sides, and they said, now is time for a one-on-one battle. This is how the battles used to begin. And these one-on-one battles, as you could tell in Badr, was now going to set the tone for the whole battle. So on the other side came an individual by the name of Talha. This is not the Talha who was Muslim. This was another Talha. He came to the battlefield and he asked for a warrior to approach him. So who's going to come from the other side? And on this side, there was none. But Ali ibn Abi Talib, he came forward. And Talha told him, he said, Ya Ali, you know nobody else has the audacity to challenge me in war. It's just you. And Ali said, yes, it's just me. And you know what's really interesting? This incident, where everyone is just standing and then Ali comes forward, it happened in Badr already, it's going to happen in Uhud, and it will show itself the most, something that Shia and Sunni have narrated in Ahzab. There's a reason why I chose this battle for the Nights of Qadr. Because Ahzab will be that decisive moment where all of Kufr and all of Iman are going to go up against one another. Ali came to the battlefield. He said, "You really going to challenge me?" He said, "Yes." The battle begun between Ali and Talha, and before you know it, it was over. Because Ali ibn Abi Talib struck him so quickly that he took such a severe wound on, and in the final moments of his life, he begged Ali not to end his life. And Ali ibn Abi Talib started to walk away. And they asked him, he said, "Why don't you end everything? Just put an end to him." He said, "He begged me by the kinship and the relationships that we had with one another." But Ali left him alone because he said he will not be able to fight anymore. So I will grant him his request because he's not going to be able to create anymore. He was so severely wounded, he was going to die, and he did die. So Ali ibn Abi Talib came back. And now the armies on both sides attack towards one another. And as they are attacking towards one another, because the main flag bearer has now been killed, someone else came and took this flag. And the next person, and every person who took the flag, they've counted up to 9, some up to 11, that everyone who took this flag, Ali ibn Abi Talib would get rid of him. This person would take the flag, this person would take the flag, and then the narration says, until this woman came and picked up the flag. There's nobody left. And this battle, though the numbers were more than 3 times on the other side, it seems as though it's working very well. So everything is going as planned. And the spoils of war are so many. The spoils of war are on the ground, and now you're that archer on that mountain. You're standing there, and everyone else is coming and taking from these spoils because the battle is almost over. And you're like, "Oh, this looks too good." But the Prophet told me not to do it. But these spoils, everyone is picking up from these spoils. But the Prophet might give us some of these spoils later on. But maybe he's not that just, and he won't give us any. And the narration says some of them, this is what they were thinking. That, this Muhammad, he may not give us anything. Like, this is your opportunity. You lose it forever. And these archers started to leave, some of them. And it's very beautiful. The Quran never generalizes because every person has his own duty. The Quran says, "Minkum man yuridu dunya wa minkum man yuridu al-akhirah." Some of you guys were after the dunya and you left. And some of you, no, you persisted. These archers started to leave one by one, and on the other side, this army that had a little bit of strength still left on it, on the side of the mushrikeen, this great commander, Khalid ibn Walid, he saw this situation. And he called his own tribes, and with many of them, the people who had horses, because not everyone in the battlefield had horses. He rode with his companions around this mountain of Aynain. Many people assume he went around the mountain of Uhud. The mountain of Uhud is so big, if you try to go around it, it'll be nighttime. He went around the mountain of Aynain. And now all of a sudden, these Muslims, many of them have even put down their weaponry because they feel like everything is ended. All of a sudden, they are being attacked from the back. And all chaos broke out. Unbelievable chaos. This complete victory is now turning into a complete defeat. Because many of them are on the ground. They don't even have their weapons with them anymore. They're just trying to grab stuff. Some of them have their weapons, but their lines are so disorganized at this point. Complete chaos broke out. And Khalid and his people launched an ambush on the Muslims. And in these moments, this complete victory started to flip into a complete defeat. Why? Because they didn't follow the command of the Prophet. These riders came from the other side, and in the midst of this chaos, a couple things happened. Amongst them was, number one, the uncle of the Prophet, Hamza, was killed. This uncle of the Prophet who had been on the Prophet's side from early on. the uncle of the Prophet, was killed by the hands of who? By the hands of Wahshi, this slave who was brought from Mecca. They told him, they said, listen, either you kill Muhammad, or you kill Ali, or you kill Hamza, one of these three. And if you get one of these three, you are free to go. And Wahshi himself narrates, because as we'll discuss tomorrow, he became a Muslim later on. He himself describes, he says, in the battlefield, I looked at Muhammad and I saw I couldn't get my hands on him. There's too many people around him. And I looked at Ali and I saw that Ali is too aware of his surroundings. When he's fighting, he's not just fighting the person in front of him. He's aware. He is kathirul iltifat. He's constantly scanning his surroundings. And the only one that I found that I would have a shot against was Hamza. And that was because Hamza was already busy in the war. And he says, I hid behind one of the bushes in the battlefield. And as Hamza, you know, in the battlefield, it's chaos. It's not like we think. It's not like the movies that we see, yes? Where the guy is running and all the arrows are coming, none of them are hitting him, right? I don't know if you've seen those movies, right? He runs, none of the arrows hit him. He takes one arrow, it hits the place they're supposed to hit. This is the movies. This is the real battle. This is the real deal. It's chaos, and in the midst of this chaos, Wahshi says, I took my spear and I threw it directly into the body of Hamza, and forgive me, it came out the other way. And he says, Hamza turned around and he looked at me and he started to charge towards me, but his body could not take it and he fell. And what happened to the body of Hamza we'll discuss tomorrow. One of the greatest masa'ib of the Prophet. It's very difficult what they did to the body of Hamza. Hamza is now killed in the battlefield. Amongst the other things that is happening in these moments is that a companion of the Prophet who looks like the Prophet is also killed. And now in the midst of all of this chaos, rumor spreads that Muhammad is dead. And if the Prophet dies, that's the end of everything. It's not the end of this battle. That's everything. And so many of these Muslims, they gave in even more and they started to run away. Because at this point they said, well, Muhammad has died. Well, then we have to run for our own lives. So we can't just sit here and persevere. We might as well run away and maybe we live. Some of them started to run back towards Medina. Medina's close by. And some of them started to run up the mountain of Uhud to find some sort of refuge in this mountain. And this is that incident that would never happen before this moment. It would never happen after this moment. This is the only time in Islamic history where this ever happened. And it's so critical, the Quran talks about it. He says, إِذْ تُسْعِدُونَ, remember those moments when you were going up the mountain, وَلَا تَلْوُونَ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ, and you wouldn't even care about anybody. Like you're just running for your life. But guess who you have left behind? وَالرَّسُولُ يَدْعُوكُمْ فِي أُخْرَاكُمْ, and the Prophet was pleading to you to come back. The Prophet was there in the mountain of Uhud, asking them to come back. But these guys were so scared, they just ran. Imagine these moments that the Prophet is pleading to his own people that you come back. And the Quran says, وَلَا تَلْوُونَ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ, and you didn't care at all to come and defend him. You were running. And this looks like complete chaos. And the lesson to be learned from all of this is this. You and I, the irony of this moment is lost on us. You and I look at this situation 1,400 years later in hindsight, and we say, how could you disobey a direct command of the Prophet? I mean, the Prophet told you this was going to happen. If it was something in the middle of the battle, you didn't know, he wasn't so clear about it, you had to improvise, all of that kind of stuff, then maybe. But I mean, he clearly told you this was going to happen. He told you you're not supposed to leave. He told you you don't leave until I tell you to come back. How could you? How is it possible that these people disobeyed a direct command of God? And the irony is that you and I do the same exact thing. And this is the lesson of the Battle of Urud. You and I disobeyed the direct command of the Prophet too. The Prophet has made many direct commands to you and I. He said you have to pray 5 times a day. He told you that the dunya will try to get the best of you. It will try to distract you. But don't fall for it. You have to come pray your 5 times prayer. And somehow, some way, we disobey his command. This direct command of the Prophet. The Prophet told you, direct command, that the best of you is the one who has the best akhlaq with his family. And yet somehow, some way, you and I disobey the command of the Prophet. This isn't a direct command. This is a direct command. The only difference between this and that is that over there the Prophet was looking them in their eyes. Here the Prophet, we don't see him. But the command is a direct command. The Prophet told you, you have to observe this dress code, this modesty, you have to lower your gaze. He's very direct command about it. And somehow, some way, you and I end up in a position where we disobey the Prophet. And this is the lesson of the Battle of Urud. These historical events, I swear, these are not events that just took place then. They all relate to our life today. All of them relate to our life today. The same way, this situation looks so terrible to us that the archers are just like leaving this direct command of the Prophet. This is exactly how you and I have to feel when we disobey the direct command of the Prophet. What happens now? And how did the Prophet take this incident that started out as a victory, then turned into almost a complete defeat? How did the Prophet salvage this battle? How did he bring out of it something that counts almost like a victory? This is the wisdom of the Prophet. And who helped him in those moments? That, inshallah, we will leave for tomorrow night. Let us take a moment, inshallah, to dim the lights and take our hearts, brothers and sisters, to the city of Kufa and the household of our beloved Imam. Sallallahu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, sallallahu alayka ya Ali ibn Abi Talib. The narration says that when Ali ibn Abi Talib had finally come to the final days of his life, when he went to the masjid and he was struck with the sword of the Mal'un ibn Muljam, the narration says that they slowly brought Ali back to his house. Imagine the weakness that Ali ibn Abi Talib is carrying with himself. This warrior of Badr and Uhud and Ahzab and Khaybar, and now he cannot even walk by himself. This warrior who torn the gate of Khaybar, and now he cannot even lift the weight of his own body. The narration says they brought him back to his house. And now some of these orphans in the city are witnessing and noticing that this man who used to come and bring them food late at night is not coming anymore. They are now witnessing that this man who used to come, leave the bread, leave the milk, and leave before they could even see who he is. He's not coming anymore. The footsteps that they waited for every single night to get a little bit of help, a little bit of aid. But Ali has fallen. Ali has been struck. And you can tell these orphans are confused that this man is not coming anymore to help us. The narration says they brought Ali to his house. And the history narrates for us some of the conversations between Kulthum, the daughter of Ali, and the Mal'un ibn Muljam. You all know what goes through the heart of a daughter when she sees what her father is going through. This is the ultimate pain. And the narration says Kulthum turned to Ibn Muljam and she said, "How dare you do this to Amirul Mu'mineen?" And he said, "I did not strike Amirul Mu'mineen. I simply struck your father. Your father is not Amirul Mu'mineen. Your father is not important. I simply struck Ali. I didn't strike Amirul Mu'mineen." And the narration says Kulthum turned towards him and said, "Ibn Muljam, I just hope and wish that my father makes it out alive out of this wound. I just hope and wish that he lives." And then Ibn Muljam said some words that brought so much pain to the heart of Kulthum. Ibn Muljam said, Kulthum, you think your father is going to live through this. You don't know what I did to this sword. You don't know the poison that I bought for this sword. You don't know how long I left this sword in the poison. There is so much poison on this sword. And the way that I struck the head of your father is not going to live after this. And you can imagine the hearts of Kulthum skips a beat. The heart of Kulthum is so full of pain. What happens to the heart of a daughter when she hears these words coming out of the mouth of the one who has killed her father? The narration says, then they called for the doctor to come. And the doctor came and started to examine the wound of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And as much as he tried to examine the wound, as much as he put pieces of cloth on the wound, this blood would not stop. And the organs were essentially giving up at this point. The narration says the doctor turned to Ali ibn Abi Talib and his family, and he said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, make your will and make your wasiyah, because there's no more coming back from a wound like this. Imagine the emotions of the household of Ali when they hear the doctor say a line like this. When the doctor turns to you, looks you in the eye, and he says, there's no more hope for your patient anymore. This is the situation in the household of Ali ibn Abi Talib. On a night like this, and in the couple of nights that are to come, what went through the heart of Zainab? What went through the heart of Kulthum? What went through the heart of Hassan and Hussein, watching their father melt away in front of their eyes? But we tell this household, Ya Ahl al-Bayt, there is going to come a time where those final moments are going to be even more painful than what Ali ibn Abi Talib is going through right now. On the 10th of Muharram, there will come a time where the final moments are so painful, even Hussein will not be able to take it anymore. Hussein's heart will not even be able to bear this pain. One of those moments was when his nephew Qasim went to the battlefield. And the narration says that when Qasim was struck on the head, he fell from the horse and he called out, Ya Amma, my uncle, come to the help and aid and assistance of your nephew. And the narration says that Hussein ran into the battlefield like he had never done before. And the narration says there was dust up in the battlefield. And when the dust settled, all of a sudden we saw Hussein sitting by the body of his nephew. And he was just speaking his final words with the body of his nephew and with the body of Qasim. And the narration says we looked closer and we saw Qasim was in so much pain. He was dragging and pushing his feet into the dirt of the plains of Karbala. And Hussein turned to Qasim and he said, Ya Qasim, it's so difficult for your uncle to hear your call but not be able to do anything. How difficult was it for Hussein to watch his nephew in the plains of Karbala? He knows he needs his help, but what help can Hussein offer to him in these moments? He said, Azza wallah ala ammik, it's so difficult for your uncle to witness you in these moments, the pain that you're going through, but there's nothing that your uncle can do. As Qasim takes his final breaths in the plains of Karbala, and Hussein then started to carry the body of Qasim all the way back to the tents of the Ahlul Bayt. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the tawfiq to be amongst the true followers of the Ahlul Bayt, inshaAllah. Let us take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat, especially the marhumin.